I'm Master Saturn. Thank you for joining me for another BDSM United podcast. You can buy all of our books and find all of our resources at www.bdsmunited.com. Today, we are continuing going through our book, Saturnian Sex Magick. Yes, that's the name of the podcast, but that's also the name of a book that we wrote. It's about a 300 and something page book, very comprehensive, very good. It outlines BDSM as a type of sex magic, and it's both esoteric and it's also very practical. It's very magical. It's almost like three books in one. So we really recommend. It's worth the 17 or so dollars to buy it on paperback. It's a great book. I think that you'll really enjoy it, and it really should set the tone for the future of BDSM. But today, let's look at the past, kind of where BDSM, where we got the terminology BDSM. What does that really mean? A lot of you will probably already know this, but maybe you'll learn some things too. And let's just, because we come from many different places, I always like to say, let's build a similar foundation. And so if you hear the term BDSM today, you may think of leather and handcuffs or maybe even scenes from like pop culture like 50 Shades of Grey. But it really has a more fascinating history, and it runs much deeper than eroticism or just for shock value. If you want to understand where bondage, discipline, sadism, and masochism come from, or how those four letters come together, you really got to do a little bit more history. Um, so let's start with defining some terms, just so that we kind of are all on the same page, because um, people don't always know what bondage, discipline, sadism, and masochism entail, just in the overall sense of the words. Bondage, the act of restraining a partner for erotic pleasure, has a long history. Archaeologists have found depictions of sexual bondage in ancient Greek pottery, uh, old Japanese prints, even the ruins of Pompeii. In the West, the word bondage itself comes from the Old French bondage, meaning condition of a serf or slave, which in turn traces back to the Latin bond, meaning one bound. The erotic sense of the word, though, really didn't come into common usage until the 20th century. Discipline, meanwhile, is a broader concept. Its roots are in the Latin disciplina, meaning instruction or training. In religious and military contexts, discipline means rules, order, and sometimes punishment. In erotic context, discipline refers to the consensual use of rules, rituals, and also sometimes punishment or consequences to heighten sexual excitement and the sense of power exchange between partners. We like to say that bondage and discipline are really the foundations of power exchange, the foundations of what you see with dom and sub and those kinds of things. A master and slave, a mistress and key holder, and all of those owners, and just the broad scope of terminology that you'll see in some place like FetLife or just on the internet altogether. While bondage is about physical restraint, discipline is more about psychological restraint, about control, obedience, the thrill of breaking, or more than that, following rules. Uh, Sadism and masochism are the other two terms in the BDSM acronym, and they have a much more recent literary origin. Both words were coined in the late 19th century, and they were named after two controversial European figures, Marquise de Sade and Leopold von Sacher-Masoch. The De Sade was a French nobleman, a writer, and philosopher whose works are infamous for the depictions of sexual cruelty, blasphemy, and violence. The word sadism was popularized by the 19th century psychiatrist Richard von Kraftebing in his book Psychopathia Sexualis from 1886. Yeah, that's a long time ago, where he used it to describe sexual pleasure derived from inflicting pain or humiliation on others. Now, Desade's writings were extreme for his day, especially, and focused on the linkage between sex and cruelty, that his name kind of became shorthand for the phenomenon. And, he wasn't necessarily the great picture of consent that we have today. And so, but neither of these figures really were. And so, origins don't necessarily, translate super well. I'm just telling you where it came from, not that these people should be looked up or modeled in any way. Now, masochism comes from Leopold von Sacher-Masoch. I'm probably butchering his name. He lived from 1836 to 1895. He was an Austrian writer whose novella Venus de Fur details the protagonist's erotic enjoyment of submission and suffering at the hands of a dominant woman. Uh, the Croft being psychiatrist or psychiatrist, yeah, psychiatrist. Sorry, also named masochism after him in Psychopathia Sexualis to describe sexual pleasure derived from being hurt or humiliated. It's worth noting that Kraft and later Sigmund Freud saw sadism and masochism as mental pathologies, symptoms of something gone wrong in the psyche. And for much of the 20th century, this making it a pathology, viewed it dominated mainstream psychology and medicine. And the people who actually enjoyed these activities, however, even though, somebody telling you that what you're into is mental illness may be somewhat of a badge of honor and rebellion and taboo, we have a different perspective, one that's really centered on pleasure, on consent, on exploration. They saw things, sorry, as a negative pathology, a mental illness, a mental disease, in those contexts, and we see them as pleasure, as exploration, as consent, as really just kind of um, even today as integrating your shadow. So it has a lot more positive aspects uh, that eventually came to light. And the pathologies and the illnesses and the diseases and all of that terminology was dropped as uh, as the positive aspects became more mainstream and more widely acknowledged. And so, sometimes science, social sciences, psychologies, science changes. And so you gotta, you can't always just hold on to science like it's science is a lot like religion. It's all made up and it changes. That doesn't mean that it's less powerful, either science or religion. It just means that, it is what it is. It's not uh it's not always just facts. So sometimes facts shift. So how did these four terms, bondage, discipline, sadism, and masochism, get stitched together into a single acronym? Well, the answer lies in the evolution of sexual subcultures in the 20th century, especially after World War II. In Europe and North America, the post war years saw the emergence of underground communities devoted to sexual exploration outside the mainstream. Think gay leather bars, private clubs, secret societies. Within these spaces, people experimented with power exchange, restraint, and erotic pain, drawing from sources as diverse as ancient art, Victorian, erotica, and maybe even the writings of Desaad and Sakarmage. So in 1950s and 60s, these practices were called S&M or sadomasochism. The term S&M appears in fiction from around that time, underground magazines, and even psychological studies of that era. But as the community grew, people began to realize that S&M didn't fully capture the full range of what they were doing. For one thing, not everyone enjoyed bondage or discipline. Not everyone who enjoyed those things identified with sadism and masochism, and we find that even today. Not everyone is into the giving and receiving of pleasurable pain. And then some people aren't really even into the uh, emotional sadism and masochism or psychological sadism and masochism. There's a lot of different aspects to it. Some people are just in it. They're very wholesome and they're very they're very wholesome, yes, in BDSM or as a branch, and they're just into the power exchange aspects of it. There's a whole uh, subculture called domestic discipline, for instance, which is a very embedded in Christianity, and they're all about they're actually kind of patriarchal, and they are into the dom and sub, and there is some aspects of spanking there, but not but mostly just about punishment, or um, mostly just about control, and less about it for erotic pain and say there's some masochism or pleasure in there. So let's fast forward uh 10 or 20 years. By the 1970s and 80s, as sexual liberation movements gained steam and underground cultures became more organized, new terminology emerged. The phrase B&D, bondage and discipline, started to appear, often alongside S&M. In some circles, people would write B&D and S&M to refer to all four practices, and over time, these terms were merged into the umbrella acronym that we have today, BDSM. The earliest documented uses were in the 80s and 90s, particularly in zines and newsletters and early internet forums devoted to alternative sexuality. The formation of the acronym was kind of organic, a way for people to signal, to kind of flag that their interests spanned on a spectrum of bondage, discipline, sadism, masochism, as well as all of the things in between, and surrounding this whole culture. The creation of an acronym was a lot more than just a linguistic convenience, though. It really marked the formation of a community. And when the internet was kind of forming, and in the 80s and 90s, community really on a more global scale kind of took off. It was more localized before that, but when the internet came around, it community became kind of a focus of all kinds of people coming together. The global people from all over the world were now coming together, and they were kind of forming communities. And I think you can find that even today. And people didn't really know what the internet was going to do. I mean, I remember when the internet came around. I remember America Online. I'm dating myself here. Yes, I'm an old fart or an old guy. It's all right. We all age, and that's just a part of human life that we have to deal with. But uh, communities, nobody knew that communities were going to be a big deal. Nobody knew what to expect from the internet. It was dropped into our laps, and we just went with it, and it became what it became. And it has both positives and consequences to its existence. But it marked the formation of a community with its own language, own values, and codes that were different than pre internet. As people who practiced these activities found each other, first in underground types of bars and maybe newsletters, and later in internet chat rooms and forums, they started to build a shared culture. This culture emphasized consent, negotiation, safety. It was eventually summed up in phrases like safe, sane, and consensual, or even more recently, risk aware consensual kink. These principles were a deliberate response to that old pathology, or that old negative view of sadomasochism. Rather than seeing themselves as sick or criminal, BDSM practitioners insisted that their activities, and we do insist today that our activities are valid, healthy expressions of sexuality. And then we provide everyone uh, informed, enthusiastic consent. It's the hallmark of BDSM. It's what separates BDSM from crime, from assault, from battery. That consent is what separates the two. It's what separates power exchange from slavery and dictatorship and those types of things. The acronym also made it possible for people to find each other. In the 90s, as the internet exploded, there were things like mailing lists, Usenet groups, personal ads. People used BDSM as a searchable tag, kind of before hashtags were even a thing. Uh, People were using keywords, and BDSM was that keyword. This allowed people who might have felt isolated, ashamed, all alone, just in their own spaces, to connect with others who shared their interests, and it built communities that spanned continents and really kind of uh, brought the whole world together, in the global scene into what we have today. I mean, you could go on FetLife and we can interact with people in all parts of the world: Singapore, Romania, Russia. We could just, all over the place, in the United States, Brazil, Australia. We can connect all to Canada. We can connect to Iceland. We can connect all over the world, all throughout Europe and in Asia. So today, BDSM encompasses everything from light spanking to intricate rope bondage, from elaborate role play scenarios to actual relationships, real life relationships built on acts of service and obedience. Some people are drawn to the intense sensation play of sadism and masochism, while others are more interested in the rituals and rules in the lifestyle of dominance and submission. The acronym, it signals a spectrum, not just one single activity or identity. Well, that's where we're at. We have just now kind of went through a very broad sense of where BDSM came from and how it came together. Bondage, discipline, forming with sadism and masochism. We'll talk more about some of this stuff as we go through more of our book, Saturnian Sex Magick, on this BDSM United podcast. Remember, you can buy the books. You can find the link for the book, the Amazon link. You can find all of the ways to connect with us on social media, FetLife, all those kinds of things at BDSMUnited.com. I'm Master Saturn. Thank you for joining me for this BDSM United podcast, and I'll see you again on the next one.